So the second brush creation process I want to talk about is creating an insert mesh brush. Now, insert mesh brushes will allow us to take specific geometry and embed them into a brush, which is going to allow us to kind of apply these details across the surface of our model. So taking things like these additive shapes here and actually adding them to a brush is going to allow us more flexibility to apply these details. Now, these insert mesh brushes work really great for creating things such as bolts or rivets or screws. And we can quickly come through and describe one shape and then keep that size consistent across our entire model. So before we get into that, I just have my model loaded in here of the helmet. And as you can see, I've gone through with some of those alpha textures we created to just pull out a little bit more of the form across the surface. I've then gone through and continued refining some of the details, so using those standard sculpting brushes and some of the H-polish to just keep flushing out the forms on the model. Now, before we can actually create an insert mesh brush, we actually have to have some geometry to actually embed into the brush. So I've gone and pulled some of the actual additive pieces of geometry that we created in the earlier videos. So this one here was created with the curved lathe brush, and then this part here was created using shadow box. So just those really simple primitives that we created earlier. Now, with these pieces, we can come in and actually start creating insert mesh brushes from these. Before I create one, though, I want to just look at this shape here. And as you can see on my actual concept, I have a little more information on the actual shape when it's embedded into the helmet. So I have an actual line to kind of cut into the model through here in this kind of oblong oval type shape. So this would be, the kind of area in which a certain tool would actually attach to tighten or untighten this actual bolt. So I want to come through and just quickly add that shape to my model here. So to do this, I'm going to come over here to my subtool palette. I'm going to locate append and click on that, and then just append in a cylinder 3D object. Now when I hit append, it actually appended that cylinder shape as a subtool, so I come and select that there. And if I turn off perspective, you're going to be able to see that that actual cylinder 3D object is roughly the same size as my initial kind of additive shape in the scene. So now I need to come down to the deformation tab here, and I'm just going to come over here to size and just scale that down. So I'm just trying to get that shape to be a little bit smaller and closer to the actual circular elements on the actual reference over here. Now I'm just going to rotate this and also turn on transparency. It's going to allow me to see this. And I'm just going to keep scaling this down until it's roughly the size where I want it to be. So something about like that. I'm just going to rotate the model and then go and grab the transpose line and just drag it out holding shift, and then click the inner circle and just kind of move that piece so it's sticking out of the top of the actual additive element there. Then I'm going to come over here and turn off transparency so I can kind of see it in relation to the original part. So now as you can see, I just need to take this cylindrical object and actually kind of extrude it out to give me that kind of oval nature to it. So I'm going to come back up to draw mode here, and I'm just going to go to my subtool palette and make sure I still have it selected and just make it the only thing on my canvas. Now I'm just going to zoom in and I'm going to turn on polyframe so I can kind of see that center point in relation to the cylinder. And I'm now going to go to my brush menu by hitting B. I'm going to isolate by the letter S and find the slice curve brush. I'm just going to hit OK on that. And now when I hold Control Shift, you're going to see that that slice curve brush is active. So if I come to a model here and just draw this out, I'm just going to try to find the center area of that actual cylinder there and just slice that in half like so. So now with the edit mode still being on, I'm just going to come over here and hold Control and Shift and click, and that's going to isolate one half of that cylinder. So now with this isolated, I'm going to turn on my other shape, and now I'm just going to switch to the Move Transpose line and just click and drag out holding Shift to get me a straight transpose, and then going back to this inner circle, holding Shift, and just moving this like so. So looking for how that actually aligns to the primitive shape, so something like that. And now I'm going to go back to draw mode here and hold Control and Shift and click off, and that's going to bring back the rest of my part. So as you can see here, I've just taken, and by just slicing that actual cylinder in half, I can then just use one part that's actually visible and kind of do an extrude functionality to kind of get that kind of tapered oval shape on my model. Now with this, I've only done one side right now, so now basically I just need to get this side to actually affect the same way on the other area. So to do this, I'm just going to do a mirror and weld. So go to the Geometry tab here, going to Modify Topology, and then just clicking Mirror and Weld. So that's going to take this side and just mirror it over the other side. So now I have that shape right there that matches closer to my reference. So now with this shape created and my actual primitive shape created, I just need to go ahead and subtract this part from this other part here. So we're going to go ahead and do that Dynamesh subtract function that we talked about in the earlier videos. I'm just going to come to my subtool palette and make sure I have that cylinder 3D object set to that half moon. Then I'm going to select the actual main shape. I'm going to turn off polyframes. I'm going to come down here to this merge option and just do a merge down. Now with these merged together, if I turn on polyframes again, you're going to notice that that part that had the half moon on it now has that white polygroup, which is going to allow us to subtract this shape from our other element. Now I'm going to go down to the Geometry tab here, open up the Dynamesh tab, set my resolution to something like 256, set blur to 0, turn project off, and Dynamesh. As you notice, as that processes, it's actually going to carve that shape right out of that original item. So you see now I have that nice kind of area there for an actual tool to come in and tighten or untighten that part. I still have some jaggies around the edges here, so I'm coming to the clay polish option up here and just run clay polish on that, and now you can see it's actually cleaned up that part really well. After you run a clay polish, it actually applies a mask. So I'm just going to clear the mask quick on that guy. And now this piece is ready to be turned into an insert mesh brush. So to create an insert mesh brush, it's actually extremely simple. You just need to take the object you want to generate into a brush and just place it on your canvas. Now the only thing you have to kind of be concerned about is however you have this object placed on the canvas is how its orientation is going to be when it actually is applied to the surface of your model. So if you placed your model like this, it's actually going to generate an insert mesh brush that's going to draw your shape out like this. If you place it like this, it's going to draw it out like that, and if you place it like that, it's going to draw it out like that. So basically you just want to make sure that you're kind of have your model positioned, just oriented the way you want it to be, and then you come up to this brush menu here and click on Create Insert Mesh Brush. Now it's going to give you a dialog that's going to ask you if you want to append or create a new brush. Since we do not have an insert mesh brush already created, we're just going to come over here and click New. And now if I come up to my brush menu over here, you can see I now have a new brush that's actually an insert mesh brush. So now if I go back to my helmet here, and I just zoom in on the part here, I can now come along the surface of this model with this brush and just click and drag, and it's going to apply that mesh right to the model. Now this is very cool kind of functionality. Just come through and start applying stuff all over the place. You will notice that every single time I'm applying this kind of mesh to my model here, that my point count is going to increase. So depending on the density of the brush that you actually create, so if I had a really high piece of geometry and turned it into an insert mesh brush, the more times you apply this to the model, it's going to increase your polygon count for that part. Another thing with these insert mesh brushes, if I come here and just kind of rotate around and look, you can see that this model right now is kind of sticking out of the surface of it, and I kind of want it to be embedded into my actual visor here. So to fix this, or to actually change this property, we're going to come up here to our brush menu, and we're going to open up this depth slider here. And in here you have an embed value. So right now embed at 34 is kind of generating that part a little bit sticking off the surface. So if I want this part to actually embed into the surface a little more, I'm going to come over here and just change the slider to around 0. And now if I come over here and click and drag, it's going to be embedded deeper into the surface of the model there. So that is kind of how you can control the actual depth of these insert mesh brushes as you're working with your model. So now if you want these pieces to be the same size everywhere you draw them, so say you want to make these kind of bolts, certain like aspects of your helmet, and you want that size to repeat everywhere, you can do this as well. So if you click and drag out, while you're dragging out, if you hold control, it's actually going to snap to the size based on your draw size slider up there. So a draw size of 64 is giving me something like that. And then if I hold spacebar and just change my draw size to say something around 9, and then come in and start drawing it out and hold control, it's going to lock into that draw size at 9. So this is going to allow you to come all the way around your model and just kind of draw these out and then hold control, and it's going to lock it into that specific size. So this is going to allow you to come through and just generate a little more consistency across your mesh. So this way all those bolts are always going to be the same size, no matter where they're placed on your model. So very cool functionality there. Another thing with these is that we can make a brush that actually has multiple of these parts. So right now this brush just has one of these meshes applied to it, but we can actually go through and take multiple meshes and combine them to form a insert multi-mesh, which is going to give us a brush that's going to have as many of these kind of additive shapes as we want. It's not going to clutter your brush menu, and it's going to allow you to apply even greater detail on the surface of your model. So to do this, I'm just going to come back over here to this tool palette over here and just open up my original kind of insert mesh shape here and just kind of scale like so. And I'm just going to append in this secondary shape. So this is the additive shape that we created with Shadowbox. So just coming down here to append and just clicking that shape. So now I have a tool here that has two subtools. So I have my first shape and I have my second shape. Now both of these are positioned in the same orientation, so I want this shape here to draw out like this, and I want the other shape to draw out like that. You may have to actually go through after you do this kind of appending and rotate your shapes around just to make sure that they're all oriented the same way before you actually generate this insert multi-mesh. So after you have this done, you just position on your canvas how you want them drawn out, come up to the brush menu here, and then instead of clicking this insert mesh, we're going to come over here and click create insert multi-mesh. Now when you click this, it's going to generate a insert multi-mesh object. So if I come back to my helmet here, I'm just going to zoom in and undo those additive parts on this visor. Now with this insert mesh brush selected, if I hit M on my keyboard, it's going to bring up this menu. And this is going to show you all the insert meshes that are actually in the actual brush we just created. So you can see here's my original shape and here's that shadow box shape. So it's gone through and generated a new insert mesh inside this insert multi-mesh for every single subtool I had in that tool over here. So if you have 100 or so subtools and you create a insert multi-mesh, it's actually going to go through and create a brush that when you hit M will have those 100 subtools here as separate parts. So now with these separate parts, I can come over and just click, if I want this one, just click that, and now I can come and draw that on the surface of my model. If I want the other one, I just come over and click that and draw that one on the surface of my model. Now if you want to set the depths for these, you actually have to go through and set them individually for each shape. So for this shape here, I could come up and give it a depth of 0, and then if I hit M and select the other shape here, I can come and give that, say, a depth of 30. And so now each of those has their own kind of depth values associated with them, so you can come through and start populating your model with those shapes. Now once you have one of these brushes kind of created and you really like it, you can go and save that as well. So you can just come back up to the brush menu and just do save as, and it's going to save that brush out. So you can apply a new icon for that and also some credits like we did on the very first video when we created the alpha brush, and you kind of save that out and share it on ZBrush Central. Now another really cool thing with insert mesh brushes is that there's a functionality in which you can get these brushes to follow a curve. So I'm just going to rotate my model here and just click on a different element, so this panel right here. And I'm going to come up to this stroke menu here, so I'm going to go to curve, and I'm just going to turn on curve mode. Now with curve mode activated, I'm just going to come in, increase my draw size some, and then just draw a curve out on the back of the helmet here. Now as you'll notice, with that curve function on, it's actually taken that insert mesh piece that we created and applied it across a curve. We can hit 5 on our keyboard and keep kind of adding different curves to this, so just locking a curve down and drawing a new one. So this is a very quick way to kind of come through and add even more ornate details to our model by applying this curve stroke to the actual insert mesh brush. Now this curve stroke as well will save with our brush, so if you have this turned on, you can just go to the brush menu here and go to save as and save it out, and that stroke with the actual curve mode applied to it will store with that brush. So now I want to talk about curves a little bit more, and I'm actually going to generate a more advanced curve brush. So I'm going to come over here to my tool palette, and I'm going to just click on my helmet here, and I'm going to locate the cylinder 3D object and just load that guy in. Now with this cylinder 3D object selected, I'm going to come down here to the actual initialize tab here, and I'm going to change my H divide and my V divide to 256 and 128, and then I'm going to change my X and Y size to 50. And this is going to give me a smooth slash very thin version of this actual cylinder object, so something like this. And then I'm going to come to the top here and do Make Polymesh 3D. So now this object is a polymesh object, and I want to make a little kind of wire shape that I can actually use with this kind of curved structure to apply a little wiring to my actual helmet here. So I have this kind of cylinder here. I'm going to come up to transform now, and I'm going to activate symmetry and turn on radial in the Z. So I'm going to turn off X and make sure Z is on, and I'm going to increase the radial count to around 8. And now I have a radial symmetry brush. So now I come in and say select the actual standard brush, change the stroke to drag rectangle, and the alpha to say alpha 13. So now with this selected, I'm making a shape that basically is going to mirror itself from top to bottom and create some sort of thermal wiring type structure. So I'm going to turn on floor quick, and you're going to notice that this cylinder right now is embedded, basically 50-50 on the actual floor. So the dead center of the actual sphere is right there. So I'm going to first come in and just, with this symmetry on and the drag rectangle, I'm going to hold Alt, maybe increase my intensity a little bit, and just click in dead center and drag a circle out like so. So something exactly like that. And this is going to give me a center line on this little shape. So the shape I'm trying to generate, I want to split into 3 polygroups, and I want to make sure that the top part perfectly matches the bottom. So next I'm going to do is just come over and just keep adding a little more of these circles here and just dragging this shape out, and then maybe do another one like that. So looking for a similar type shape like this. So we got our center line and we got 2 points on top. Now with this like so, I now want to come in and actually slice this section in half. So I want to come through and generate a slice so I get a polygroup here, a polygroup in the middle, and a polygroup on the bottom. And once I generate these 3 polygroups on this object, I'm going to be able to use that curve functionality along with a weld property to give me a seamless curve that's going to allow me to populate this wire across the mesh. So I'm going to hit B on my keyboard, and I'm going to isolate by the letter S. I'm going to find Slice Curve, and I'm just going to hit OK to that. I'm going to hold Control and Shift to get that slice curve, and I'm just going to drag this out and position it roughly at this second row of cylinders here, so something like that. And just click that. And if I turn on my polyframe, you'll see I have a polygroup here and a polygroup here now. So the next thing I want to do is I want to take this top part and mirror it down to the bottom. So I'm going to come over to the Geometry tab. I'm going to go to Modify Topology. I'm going to find Mirror and Weld. I'm going to turn on Z, turn off X, and then click Mirror and Weld. So this took that top part and then flipped it down to the bottom. So now I have a shape that's like this, and it's perfectly symmetrical top to bottom. And I want to go through and now generate 3 polygroups. So right now I have a polygroup here, but the top and the bottom polygroups are the same. So I need to come through and set this bottom polygroup here to be different from the one on the top. So I'm going to hold Control Shift and click and just isolate that bottom polygroup out. I'm going to hit B on my keyboard again, and I'm going to locate the Select Rectangle. So hit S and then hit R for Select Rectangle. And now I'm going to hold Control and Shift and just drag a green box along the bottom one there. And with that part only visible, I'm going to hit Control W, which is going to assign it a new polygroup. So now with a new polygroup generated there, I'm going to hold Control and Shift and bring back all my pieces. And I now should have this section set up with 3 polygroups. So now with these polygroups set up, I can now turn this into an Insert Mesh brush. And it's going to make an Insert Mesh Triparts brush. So ZBrush is going to look at these 3 polygroups, and it's going to assume that this top polygroup is the start, this bottom polygroup is the end, and then it's going to take this middle one here and repeat it based on how long the actual curve is. So if I get on my polyframes here and just come up to my brush menu up here and just do Create Insert Mesh. It's just going to ask me if I want a new or append. I'm just going to go ahead and hit New. And now I'm going to go back to my helmet model over here. Just activate this guy here. I'm going to go and find a part on my model, say like this part here. Just kind of zoom in on that guy. And right now this brush that I just have created is just set up as your normal insert mesh. So I come over here and say turn off symmetry and then drag this out. You're just going to get something like this. So nothing really fancy. It's kind of just hanging out in the shape there. And it's acting like some of the brushes we created originally with the insert mesh functionality. So if I undo that and then go up to stroke and go and turn on that curve mode, and say change my draw size some and draw it out now as a curve, you're going to see it's going to take those three pieces and it's going to generate something like this. So you can see here's that top part and there's that end part, and then you can see it's taken those middle sections and repeated them across the length of the curve. So it's turned that middle polygroup into a repeating shape. So this is why we needed to make it symmetrical all the way through. Now with this kind of shape drawn out, I can come through and start conforming this, but it's not really giving me that precise cylinder shape I want. So you can see I have these kind of unwelded areas in between. Well, if you come over to your brush menu now and then come down here to the actual modifier menu, down here there's weld points. So if I come over here and click weld points and then come back to my actual curve and update, it's going to go through and weld those points. So now you can see I've got that shape now all welded together, and you can kind of move it around the surface of your model. So if I undo here and just clear that stroke back out and then say change my brush size to a smaller scale here, I can now start drawing these wires out across the surface of my model. And once they're drawn out, you can manipulate them still. So if you just drag a kind of one of these curve ends, you can kind of move it around. And you can rotate and position these things here so they actually flow through some of these other elements on my helmet here. So just coming through and moving them like so. And then just rotating and moving. Now you'll get this kind of blue circle, which will allow you to influence the curve. So move that in certain areas. And you can see how this can quickly help create very intricate details on your models. So you just come through quick, generate one of these tri-part brushes, and then start applying that shape to the surface. So very fast workflow on your models. So that's the introduction to using some of these insert mesh brushes and creating them. Once again, you can save all these out after you have them created by just going to your brush menu up here and going Save As. And you can save all three of the different types of insert meshes. So you can save the ones you just can click and drag. You can save the ones that actually correspond or follow a curve and repeat it themselves, or the one that you actually need to create a 3 polygroup setup for a tri-part brush, and it'll take the start and the end and then repeat the middle section along a curve. So very powerful functionality inside these brushes to apply tons of detail on your model. So that about covers the quick intro for all these insert mesh brushes, and we will continue sculpting and adding more details on our helmet here as we continue working inside with Zbrush.